Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a story today that honestly unfolds exactly like a cinematic masterpiece. We're talking about the life of Joe Eszterhas. Now, if you're a fan of 1990s cinema, that name probably rings some very loud bells. He was easily one of the most controversial, highly successful screenwriters in modern film history. But here's the crazy part. The movies he wrote, they actually pale in comparison to his real life. We're going to trace this massive, dramatic three-act journey from being a displaced refugee to becoming literally the highest-paid screenwriter in Hollywood, and then his totally unexpected transformation into a profound spiritual seeker. So, let's get right into it.
Think about this for a second. Just really put yourself in this headspace. If you achieved ultimate wealth and fame, would it solve all your problems? Or would it just create entirely new ones? I mean, it's kind of the ultimate human fantasy, right? We so often convince ourselves that if we just had the money, just had the recognition, it would magically erase all of our internal struggles. Well, Joe Eszterhas's life perfectly illustrates this universal dilemma. He reached the absolute, undeniable pinnacle of an industry completely obsessed with status, only to find out that the mountaintop was actually incredibly hollow. His story forces us to take a step back and really challenge our own perceptions of what success actually means.
Every great screenplay has a gripping first act. So, let's look at Act 1, The Outsider's Advantage.
Okay, let's dive into this. Long before the million-dollar paychecks and the red carpets, Eszterhas was a displaced child in post-World War II Hungary, escaping political terror and communist control in the 40s and 50s. That trauma forged a deeply resilient, permanent outsider perspective in him. Fast forward to the 60s and 70s, and he's actively channeling that raw survival instinct into a career as a fearless gonzo journalist for Rolling Stone magazine, thrusting himself directly into the chaotic center of the American Cultural Revolution. And from there, he makes this breathtaking leap in the 80s and 90s to peak Hollywood screenwriter. He was navigating the high-stakes, cutthroat entertainment world using the exact same survival tactics he had to learn as a refugee. It's a pretty incredible ascent.
And to really understand his wildly successful writing style later on, we have to understand gonzo journalism. Working alongside absolute legends, guys like Hunter S. Thompson, Eszterhas learned pretty quickly that strict, detached objectivity isn't always the best way to uncover the truth. Gonzo journalism totally embraces the personal perspective, deliberately blurring the lines between the reporter and the participant. By challenging those traditional, stuffy journalistic conventions, he learned how to look right past carefully crafted public personas to dig up the dark, hidden realities that people desperately try to keep buried. And you know, that specific skill became his ultimate Hollywood trademark.
During his wild years at Rolling Stone, he was constantly sitting down with revolutionary boundary pushers. I mean, he saw Jimi Hendrix up close, completely embodying pure artistic freedom and this wild willingness to experiment. He watched comedian Sam Kinison deliver these fearless, aggressive sets that actively challenged and provoked audiences. And through all this, Eszterhas realized something absolutely crucial. Powerful art must provoke a genuine emotion. But arguably, his most profound influence came from the soul legend Otis Redding. Eszterhas actually conducted an interview with Redding literally right before the singer's tragic, fatal plane crash.
That horrific tragedy with Otis Redding left a permanent mark on his soul. It taught him that moments that seem totally ordinary often become meaningful only in hindsight. At the time, it was just another assignment for a magazine. But suddenly, without any warning at all, it became a piece of history, one of the very last recorded glimpses into the life of a true legend. This taught Eszterhas a profound, heavy lesson. Life can change in an absolute instant. And it really reinforced his driving desire to capture the raw, unfiltered, messy truth of human existence in absolutely everything he wrote.
So when he eventually made the pivot to screenwriting, he for sure didn't write safe, predictable stories. Not at all. He actively explored the dark corners. Desire, obsession, jealousy, ambition, corruption, sexuality. Eszterhas often said he was driven by a twisted little man inside his imagination who absolutely refused to look away from uncomfortable truths. And yeah, while some critics out there just dismissed it as cheap sensationalism, the sheer emotional intensity of his work was undeniable. He used his storytelling to dissect the hidden and sometimes really ugly aspects of human nature.
And this brilliantly illustrates that exact psychological tension present in all his best characters. On the left side, you've got the external desires his characters are desperately chasing: success, love, freedom. But then, right there on the right side, you see the internal turmoil they're actively battling, trying to maintain their integrity, falling deep into obsession, or that desperate need for control.
He didn't write simple comic book heroes and villains. He wrote deeply flawed, messy people struggling between opposing desires. And audiences engaged so fiercely because, let's be real, they recognize these actual internal human conflicts within themselves.
That unique psychological approach launched him to the absolute top. This brings us to Act 2, Peak Hollywood and the Void.
He transitioned into an unavoidable, absolute titan of the film industry with these massive blockbuster sensations. You had Flashdance, which perfectly captured universal perseverance, just tracking the raw ambition of an ordinary person trying to achieve an extraordinary dream. And then, Basic Instinct. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just a movie, it became a complete 90s cultural phenomenon by leaning so heavily into moral ambiguity and power dynamics. It kept viewers entirely uncertain of what was true and what was a lie. These films proved without a doubt that he could connect emotionally with massive global audiences. And the reward for that massive global connection? Millions. Literal millions of dollars. To put that into perspective, studios recognized his entirely unique value and paid unprecedented, historic sums just for his imagination. Joe Eszterhas entered the history books as one of the highest-paid screenwriters to ever live. Think about it. The displaced refugee kid from Hungary was now operating in Hollywood's most elite, exclusive circles. He had the money, he had the status, he had the power. He had officially achieved the dream, the whole shebang.
But here's the emotional hinge of his whole story, a really hard truth. Success often magnifies existing issues instead of solving them. Despite the millions of dollars and the massive fame, Eszterhas discovered that those external achievements do absolutely nothing to resolve internal struggles. The wild culture of excess in Hollywood basically just threw fuel on the fire. It trapped him in this vicious cycle of self-indulgence, constant high-stakes pressure, and, frankly, poor decisions. The very success that was supposed to save him was actually just amplifying his deepest, darkest flaws.
Well, you can only fly so high on fumes before the engine finally gives out, which brings us to Act 3, the rewrite.
The catalyst for his heavy, very public downfall began with the incredibly polarizing film Showgirls. When it was released, the critical backlash was, well, brutal, is putting it mildly. For a writer who was so accustomed to massive influence and praise, this widespread, agonizing public failure was a massive shock to the system. But in hindsight, it was completely necessary. It forced Eszterhas into a period of deep, painful self-examination. He had to learn true resilience. And fascinatingly enough, the film itself eventually evolved from a complete critical disaster to a genuinely beloved cult classic, kind of proving that artistic reputations can absolutely find new appreciation over time.
But the failure of a single movie was honestly just the tip of the iceberg. Eszterhas was finally forced to confront his real, personal demons. He had to face his severe alcohol addiction. He had to reckon with the anger and the inflated ego that had alienated so many people around him, and he had to look really hard at his own self-destructive behavior, all of which, by the way, stemmed right back to that unresolved childhood trauma. He had this harsh, undeniable epiphany. His external Hollywood success could absolutely not heal his internal pain. He had to finally stop trying to fix his soul with box office receipts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark, visual contrast in the themes of his life and his writing. His early years were completely driven by that twisted little man we talked about, exploring ambition, sex, corruption, and power. But as he confronted his darkness, he experienced a massive, profound spiritual awakening, fully embracing Christianity. And look at his focus. It pivoted drastically to forgiveness, redemption, sacrifice, and hope. This faith wasn't just some abstract theoretical concept for him. It was a daily discipline of prayer and deep reflection that gave him the actual strength to conquer the habits that had nearly destroyed him.
And this newfound faith built into a deep intellectual fascination with the Shroud of Turin. Now, whether you view it as genuine historical evidence or you remain a total skeptic, it perfectly illustrates his attempt to bridge his old self with his new self. He was taking that inquisitive, relentless investigative mind he developed as a gonzo journalist, and he was applying it directly to his profound spiritual awakening. He stopped viewing the secular and the spiritual as these totally opposing forces, seeing them instead as complementary ways to just explore human existence. So as we look back at this incredible arc from rags to riches to redemption, the core takeaways are incredibly clear. 1. Inner fulfillment simply cannot be bought, and success absolutely does not guarantee happiness. 2. True creativity requires the courage to explore the uncomfortable. 3. Even when that exploration leads to failure, setbacks are just opportunities for reinvention. Failure is not final. 4. Personal change is always possible. You are never permanently defined by your past mistakes. And 5. Long after the fame fades, meaning and purpose are what actually sustain us.
Joe Eszterhas traveled through literal war, incredible wealth, dark addiction, and crushing public failure to finally figure it out. But what about you? What does true meaning look like in your own life? Are you chasing external success to try and fix an internal problem, or are you actually building a life anchored in genuine purpose? It's a profound question, and definitely one worth exploring long after this explainer ends. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this story inspires you to keep seeking what truly matters. See you next time.